I know firsthand what it's like to get caught in the illusion, trying to reconcile who someone seemed to be with how they actually treated you. And what keeps so many of us stuck is the confusion, because it's hard to believe the same person could hold both extremes. And that's exactly how they get in. Not by being abusive upfront, but by being everything you thought was safe. So there's this movie called Good on Paper that does a surprisingly good job of showing how this kind of personality slips under the radar. And it starts in a way that probably sounds familiar. It's nothing dramatic, just a woman meeting a guy on a plane. And he's a little awkward. Definitely not her usual type. But he's sweet and seems genuinely interested in her. He listens and he remembers. He's very consistent. And he's not charming in that polished, too good to be true kind of way. He's more of the quiet, sweater wearing, nervous, but harmless type. The kind of person who feels safe simply because they seem so normal. And that's exactly why she let her guard down. But over time, things start to feel off. Nothing huge at first, just little moments that don't quite line up. He'd say one thing and then contradict it later. He mentions a job, but the details feel a little fuzzy. And he talks about his place, but something about it doesn't add up. And she notices, but she also second guesses herself. She thinks maybe she misheard. And you know what? It's not a big deal anyway. Because up until now, he's been everything she could want in a partner. She knows him as someone who is kind, supportive, and thoughtful. And the lies don't match that picture that she had in her head. So she minimizes the red flags to fit the story she wants to believe. And this all may be sounding familiar if you've been with a covert narcissist. And later on, we're going to dig really deep into exactly why we do this. But first, let's talk about how it all unravels in this here story, as it always does eventually with a narcissist. So she finds out that the job was fake. The apartment wasn't his, and pretty much everything he told her was a lie. Everything was a performance where he'd say exactly what she wanted to hear and show up how she needed him to show up. And in the movie, it all ends in this wild, over-the-top way. But the truth is, stuff doesn't always explode. Sometimes it just wears you down slowly. It comes in with a small dig here and a dismissive comment there. And your confidence quietly erodes as you try to make sense of it. It doesn't always look like a cinematic breakdown. Sometimes it's just a slow unraveling, like death by 1,000 paper cuts. And that's what makes it so confusing, because you're not just reacting to what they did, you're trying to make what they did fit with who you thought they were, the kind, attentive version of them, the one who felt so safe. But this is exactly how covert narcissists operate. They don't lead with control. They lead with attunement. They study you and mirror your values. They become what you need, and not to connect, but really to gain access to you. And when their mask starts to slip, they don't take responsibility for any of it. They just rewrite the story. And there you are, left questioning your memory, your instincts, and questioning everything, essentially, except for them. So on the surface, you're probably thinking, okay, I wanted to believe that that version of them was true. Okay, got it, I understand. But there's more going on beneath the surface, and it's really going to help you to understand exactly what it is. So we're going to dig into that right now. So let's talk about really why it's so hard to make sense of it all. So when the woman in the story found out who this guy really was, the problem wasn't just that he lied, although that was a problem. The real problem, though, was that the version of him she thought she knew didn't fit with what she was seeing now. And that all lands in this weird, disorienting way. You don't know which version is real, so you hold on to the one that felt better. Most of us have experienced this, even in small ways. So maybe a friend you always trusted makes a hurtful comment, or your partner shows affection in private but dismisses you in front of other people. And instead of calling it out, your brain tries to explain it away. And if this happens once, the experience, it's all soon gone and forgotten, right? You just let it go. But when it happens all the time, it creates a more constant state of contradiction. And that is called cognitive dissonance. And in the context of a relationship, this is what happens when your beliefs about someone clash with what they're actually doing. And your mind works overtime to close that gap. And here's what's wild: your body can feel the dissonance way before you can name it. And when someone you trust says something that cuts you deep, your brain tries to make sense of it, but your body already knows something's off. And maybe it's not enough to trigger a full on panic, but it's enough to throw you off. So instead of reacting, you get quiet. Maybe you freeze up mid sentence, or maybe your stomach tightens. And you might, as many of us do, start scanning for ways to just smooth it over, to go back to that version that felt safe and felt good. And that's your nervous system reacting to two truths it cannot reconcile. And this is what covert narcissists are so good at. They keep you in that space where your body feels uncomfortable, but your mind keeps trying to explain it away. And when you're with a covert narcissist, this happens all the time because they don't usually show up as bad people. They show up as kind, generous, and empathetic, sometimes even wounded. So when the manipulation starts, when they twist your words or guilt you or flip the script, it naturally hurts, but it's also really confusing because it doesn't match who they said they were. And instead of trusting the red flag, you start explaining it away. You minimize the discomfort and you shift blame onto yourself because letting go of the version of them you loved can feel like losing solid ground. And that's the thing. Even when the red flags start piling up, even when your body is screaming that something feels wrong, your brain still holds on to the version of them you met at the beginning. And that's not a flaw in your judgment. It's just how the brain works. So now let's dig a little bit deeper into that version of them you met in the beginning and why it's so hard to let go. And this is something that we see in all areas of our lives, but it's more pronounced when it's somebody that you brought in really close to you. When you form an impression of someone and then they become the most important person in your life. It's definitely more intense. But ultimately, what we're talking about here is why first impressions are so hard to unlearn. So when we first form an impression of someone, especially if we're in a vulnerable place, the brain locks it in, not just who they are, but who we believe they might be. So when their behavior starts contradicting that image, we don't just toss it out and start fresh. We try to make the new information fit the old story. And this is what psychologists call belief perseverance. It's a mental reflex that keeps us loyal to our first impression, even when new evidence says something completely different. So instead of thinking, maybe I was wrong about them, we think, you know what, they're just stressed, or, oh, wow, you know what, that wasn't like them at all. And then, of course, there's the infamous, they didn't mean it that way. But the longer we hold on to that original version, the harder it gets to leave. Because now we're not just letting go of a person, we're letting go of a story that we invested in. So we talk a lot about the sunk cost fallacy in relationships like these, right? We think about how much we've invested in the relationship, but we have also invested in the story, in the belief that they are a good person and that they are everything that we wanted or needed them to be in the beginning. And so the sunk cost fallacy applies here too. We've built that up so much, and then every time something happens to challenge that belief, we've explained it away. We've explained it in our minds in a way that makes sense to the story. And so the story just gets stronger and stronger, even though their behavior is constantly contradicting it over and over again. And it's really that emotional investment. So we're talking about the time, the hope, and the belief that makes it so hard to walk away. So I once worked with someone who ended up finding herself in a relationship like this. And she had told me that early on, one of the things that really made her feel special and feel like this was a real relationship was the moment that he introduced her at church. So he brought her in and he made a big deal out of it. was the first time he called her his girlfriend, and it made her feel really special. But then, and this was one of the earliest red flags, a few weeks later, they ran into a friend of his at a coffee shop. And this time, he hesitated. And his friend asked who she was because she was standing right there. And he awkwardly called her just a friend. She told me how her stomach dropped in that moment, but she just brushed it off because she didn't want to seem needy. So she did as we all do, and she made excuses for it. She told herself that maybe he was just caught off guard and didn't know what to say. But deep down, she couldn't stop replaying that moment because it didn't match the version of him where he once showed her off like she mattered. And that's the thing. When you've already built a story in your mind about who someone is, moments like this really throw you off. But instead of rewriting the whole story, you just rewrite that one moment as a fluke. And the shiny, happy version of this person gets to live on in your mind. So this is how we end up ignoring all of those red flags, right? And I'm a firm believer that we do this because we don't fully know at the time how dangerous it is to overlook stuff like this, how dangerous it is to write something off as a fluke when it's really part of that person's character. So now if you're watching this, you've probably passed this point in your own story where there are just some minor red flags. But let's try to go back to that moment and talk about what you don't see coming. And this is definitely not to beat yourself up for missing the red flags or overlooking them or rewriting them. I've already talked through, and hopefully my explanations have helped you understand that this is what we do to create a sense of safety. It's more part of our wiring that we can be aware of and rewrite, but it's not your fault that you did it. But what you don't see coming at this point, what I didn't see when I was in it, and what none of us really do, is the moment when the rewrite stops working. So it doesn't always happen all at once. Sometimes it's really quiet, and you notice that you're making excuses more often than not. So maybe you feel a little sick when their name pops up, or you start rehearsing conversations in your head before you bring something up, because part of you already knows how they'll respond. And then there's that one moment, maybe it's small, maybe it's subtle, but in that moment, something clicks. And instead of explaining it away, you just sit with it. You don't want to believe it. You hate that you're even thinking it. But it's there. That's the moment where your nervous system and your mind finally catch up to each other. And it's disorienting and it's painful and it's oddly quiet. But it's also the beginning of something else, something that lets you finally stop twisting yourself to protect their image. And if you're ready to go deeper on that right here and now, watch this video right here where I break down the exact behaviors that keep people stuck, especially when the person doesn't look like the kind of person who would hurt you. But be sure to like this video before you go if you haven't already, and I'll see you again soon.